Welcome to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard. Thank you so much for joining us. In this segment, we're going to be speaking with Dr. Nick Sopko. He's joining us here as Chief Scientific Officer of PolarityTE. It's a company that's leading the way in the development of regenerative tissue products to address significant unmet medical needs in chronic wounds, such as diabetic foot ulcers, or DFUs. He's going to talk about the enrollment of the first subject in the Phase 3 pivotal study evaluating SkinTE. Welcome to Health Professional Radio, Dr. Nick Sopko. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Well, I did, of course, mention your role as Chief Scientific Officer of PolarityTE. Give us a brief look into your professional background and talk about the goal, the vision of PolarityTE.
Sure. I've been doing biomedical research for about 20 years now. Started in undergrad as a chemistry major, and then went on to do some research work at the NIH, and then went on to an NIH-sponsored MD PhD program with Case Western Reserve and the Cleveland Clinic in Cleveland. Pursued both my medical degree as well as a PhD in stem cell biology. They're focused on cardiac regeneration with cardiac stem cells, and then kind of got the bug for the sort of next-gen therapies of trying to not only stop disease, but really reverse it. And then after that, went on to Johns Hopkins, where I did my urologic surgery residency with a focus on reconstruction, worked on some novel regenerative therapies there. For example, we had a neo-urinary conduit where we were trying to develop large tissue constructs for urinary transportation following bladder cancer. And it's there at Hopkins where I met the two other co-founders of PolarityTE, who were also surgical residents focused on regenerative therapies. And they went on to start PolarityTE, and then following my residency, I went on to join them there. Right now, we are focused on SkinTE, which is, our sort of major therapeutic that we are developing. But really since its inception, Polarity has been focused on leveraging our body's innate ability to heal and regenerate itself, to be able to treat, diseases that don't really have good therapies right now. So, our pipeline currently is really focused on skin and skin regeneration, because there's a lot of obvious needs there. But we see our technology as really being a platform technology that we can leverage for other diseases down the road.
SkinTE, tell us about SkinTE, what it's indicated for, and this trial that I'd mentioned in the beginning.
Absolutely. So SkinTE, its generic term, which is a bit of a mouthful, but to be thorough, I'll go ahead and describe it. So the generic term is an autologous heterogeneous skin construct, basically a sort of complex way of saying that it's a autologous therapy that is made out of the patient's own skin. And so the sort of inspiration for SkinTE is understanding, as we all know, as many of us suffer, up to 1,000 sort of injuries in our lifetime to our skin, scrapes, bumps, things like that when we fall off our bicycles. We all know that skin is able to heal itself. And, that is an important role of skin. It obviously it's our largest organ of our body and creates a barrier to the outside world, keeping things like bacteria out, regulating our temperature, and keeping our moisture in. But skin actually has a lot of complex functions, such as the thermal regulation, being able to sense, the outside environment, has some hormonal functions as well. We think about vitamin D and sun exposure. And along those lines, the goal of SkinTE isn't just to create new covering, sort of like a dressing, but really be able to treat large wounds that our skin can't close itself. So our skin's very good at closing smaller wounds. But if you think about, large burn injuries or, industrial accidents, things where you might have a large complex wound, our skin is unable to close that wound before things like scarring or infection set in. And so that's where SkinTE is designed to really help address those wounds. Our body has simply not evolved to deal with, chronic wounds that develop later in life or, burns and things like that. And so we set out to develop a product that can leverage what our skin can already do, but address wounds that it's not designed, our skin isn't inherently adept at treating.
When it comes to diabetic foot ulcers or DFUs, how difficult are they to treat? They're relatively small based on some of the other wounds that SkinTE might be useful in. What is it about DFUs that makes them so difficult?
Yeah, so that's a great question. DFUs are, a very complex problem that are, sort of a very bad side effect of diabetes, especially if diabetes goes untreated. And as we're all aware, the rates of diabetes are increasing, really all around the world. And, that's a byproduct of individuals just getting older with age, as well as, our Western diets can also promote that. What can happen, diabetes are sort of multifactorial, where, a couple of things will cause them. One of the root problems is that with diabetes, people actually lose sensation within their feet. And so they will basically, their feet, the mechanics of our walking actually changes with that loss of sensation. And then parts of the feet begin to rub on the shoes. And, basically you get a blister, essentially, if you will, that then develops into this chronic wound that often individuals won't even feel initially, so they don't even know it's occurring. And then on top of it, because of the altered mechanics of the feet, as well as potentially altered blood flow and the reduced healing ability from having diabetes in the first place as a chronic wound, these wounds have a difficult time in closing and can stay open. And then, and with that, you can get exposure of some of the deeper structures, things like bones, tendons, things that are important to the foot mechanics. And then that really sets people up for infection. And then that's where things get really dangerous, that, the majority of, lower extremity amputations are the result of an infected diabetic foot ulcer. And these foot ulcers, even if you can get them to close with current therapies, roughly about 50% of them will go on to recur. And so it's, they really pose a large challenge. And, overall, the cost to the U.S. Healthcare industry is, upwards of $20 billion with all the sequelae. A lot of people have compared diabetic foot ulcers to cancer, that if you're developing a diabetic foot ulcer, especially an infected one, that your 5-year mortality rates, are less than some of our most common cancers, because they can really sort of snowball into a lot of bad complications, for the patient.
Could you describe for us the process by which a patient's skin cells are harvested? You said it was made from a patient's own skin, and how it's then engineered into SkinTE and given to the patient. Then I'll ask for a web address where our listeners can learn more.
Yeah, absolutely. Really important to the therapy is that this is an autologous therapy. And the goal there is that we're using, really all of the various skin populations within the skin, not just one population, but all the different populations, which we know from years and years of research, being done around the world, that these populations need to work in concert. So I can't go into all the details. Obviously, there's some proprietary, details there. But basically, we take a small piece of skin, a little bit larger than a quarter, and turn it into a paste-like substance that has these, what we call multicellular segments that have all these various cell populations that then get spread onto the wound, sort of like a paste. And so it can be spread across the wound, and that allows a small amount of the patient's skin to really treat these large wounds. And because it's the patient's own skin, those skin cells are able to kind of stick within the wound bed and grow and create new skin. So the wound is really closing from the inside out versus the wound closing from the outside in, which is sort of the normal way that wounds heal. And so that's a novel approach that we're taking and leveraging our body's innate cells. And as you mentioned, we currently have, a phase 3 pivotal trial registered with the FDA for our biologics, approval process, where we're evaluating SkinTE versus standard care to treat complex diabetic foot ulcers that have exposed structures like bone and whatnot that are very difficult to treat.
Give us a website where our listeners can learn more.
Yeah, your listeners can find more information at www.PolarityTE.com, and that's PolarityTE.com.
Great. Nick, it's been a pleasure. I know 10 minutes is not a lot of time to discuss such a vast topic. Hoping that you'll come back and give us some more information,
Absolutely.
Especially as the trial progresses.
Yeah, we'd be more than happy to, and we really appreciate the opportunity to share with your listeners about this exciting new technology.
You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard, in conversation with Dr. Nick Sopko. Audio copies of this program are available at hpr.fm and healthprofessionalradio.com.au. You can also subscribe to the podcast podcast on iTunes. Listen in, download at SoundCloud, and be sure and subscribe to our YouTube channel on youtube.com/Health Professional Radio.